The Phantom Carriage was directed by Victor Sierström and is considered the cornerstone of Swedish cinema, having influenced a generation of filmmakers including Ingmar Bergman and even Stanley Kubrick. The film can be considered a very loose adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, sharing some similar themes and plot points, both using supernatural encounters to force a morally corrupt man to confront the consequences of his life. The difference here being that instead of being visited by three spirits, our central character David, played by the director himself, is visited by the driver of the Phantom Carriage, a person whose duty is to collect the souls of those who have died and escort them to the afterlife. The carriage driver forces David to reflect on his past through a series of flashbacks and present by travelling on the carriage itself. This is a film that I hadn't seen up until recently, but I'd always heard good things about it through silent film enthusiasts. It's always a good sign when there's a Criterion Collection version of it. And in some ways, I have to agree. This is an entertaining and thematically layered film. There are quite a few aspects of it I really appreciated. The most obvious and repeatedly mentioned by fans is, of course, the visual style, specifically the Phantom Carriage itself. The director managed to create a ghostly effect through the use of double exposure, so that the carriage and the driver are seen as transparent in many scenes. Here's a simple explanation. First, they filmed the ghostly elements, so the carriage and the driver. Then they rewound the film in the camera, and they filmed a real-world scene over it. Because the film was exposed twice, the ghostly figures appeared semi-transparent, floating within the live-action environment. The difficulty is that this required perfect alignment. This was still a point in film history where cameras were cranked by hand, so if the camera moved even slightly between exposures or the rotation speed between cameras was off, the illusion would break. Luckily for us, the illusion is effective about 95% of the time. There's a few shots here and there where usually the lighting doesn't support the effects integration, but they're very few and far between, and you probably won't even notice them unless you're looking. Additionally, the directing is again, for the most part, quite advanced for the time. There are no elaborate camera movements or anything too flashy, but it's incredibly deliberate. Tight, boxed-in compositions for scenes of domestic misery or alcoholism, and wide, desolate exteriors for supernatural or reflective moments. He captures moral ambiguity and vulnerability quite effectively. One of the details that impressed me the most was the strong sense of flow the film had. Personally, I think that most silent films need substantial amounts of editing to make them more easily digestible to modern audiences. That's the main reason I started my Silent Films Relight series, which you can check out in the description below. But there's not much in the film you could get rid of. The length of the shots are exactly what they need to be. There's very little awkward lingering on the frame that should have changed several seconds earlier. The acting is more naturalistic compared to the majority of other silent films, so it allows you to take the plight of the characters seriously, for the most part. Okay, so now we need to get into some of the detractors, some of the more negative points. On the plus side, there are only really two major detractors I have for the film, but it does take a lot away for me. And the first detractor is our central character himself, David. Not in how he's performed, but how he's written. The problem is that he's such a colossal ass for just about no reason other than he's an alcoholic, that it makes it really difficult for the audience to root for his redemption. And I don't just think this is a personal preference thing. I think there are some overarching issues in the writing where the actions of the characters don't match between how he is at the start compared to the end. I'll give you a few examples. In one of the first flashbacks, we are shown David living a good life with his wife, brother, and 2 children. Everyone's happy. Then he gets introduced to alcohol by one of his friends and everything starts falling apart. Fairly standard setup. He becomes more abusive, neglectful, and just generally more dislikable. I'm fine with this so far. That's what alcoholism can do in extreme cases. However, then he just starts doing irrational acts of malice, like when he rips off the patchwork the Salvation Army does to fix his coat right in front of her, just to try and cause her pain. Or perhaps more notably, when he starts abusing his own children when they're sleeping. I don't buy this as the actions of a once good man who only changed because of drink. It doesn't totally alter your moral code, it just changes how you act on your existing impulses. Of course, it could be argued that the alcoholism is more symbolic than literal, so the character's actions aren't meant to be taken as realistic. But given the overall quality and timelessness of most of the rest of the film, frankly, I would expect better from the director. Emotionally, I just see it as a distraction, but that's not necessarily going to be an issue that affects most audience members. My other big issue is, unfortunately, again, with another main character, the Salvation Army worker, Sister Edith. And again, not in how she's performed, but how she's written. However, in this case, it is only one aspect of her character that really irritates me, and that's this seemingly tacked on love interest relationship between her and David. About 2/3 of the way through the film, she just announces out of nowhere that she loves him, and that's one of the main reasons she wants to help him. Okay. Firstly, why in the world are you in love with him? There are absolutely no characteristics about this character that make him desirable. Aside from the fact he's homeless, he emotionally or verbally abuses her every time they share a scene. He never shows her any kindness, he's an alcoholic, and is just generally horrific with everyone he meets. So, what's the attraction? Suffice to say, that little subplot really distracts me from emotionally investing myself. She would be a much stronger character if her motivations were purely because she sees him as a lost soul and just wants to help him, whatever the cost. But hey, that might not bother you. It depends what you get out of silent films. Oh, one more thing about this character. I said her acting was pretty good for the most part, but her acting as she's on her deathbed is less than stellar, if we're being hypercritical. She goes from having zero energy to jumping up and down quite a few times. It's quite distracting. This is pretty common for similar scenes in other silent films, but in this one, it stands out as distracting to me because so many other aspects of the film are such high quality. Before we finish off, let's talk about the music. There's only really 2 viable options for this film, unless you can see it performed live, and those versions can both be seen on the Criterion Collection, the US release. But don't worry if you're from a different part of the world, both musical scores are available on YouTube, which I'll put links to in the description below. The 2 scores take a very different approach. The first being Orchestral, written by Matti Bye, sounding reminiscent of what you might expect a silent film to sound like. It's quite effective at communicating the emotional core of the film, synchronising nicely with the visuals on a scene-by-scene basis. It lacks a bit of polish though. It's a bit overly flamboyant whenever action's taking place, trying to convey that sense of loss of control that accompanies being drunk, when I think instead it needed to capitalise more on the sense of unease and dread to help the audience take it more seriously. The same can be said for a lot of the scenes that are trying to convey drunken actions through music. The other score was composed by KTL, an electronic music duo, and their score excels quite well at focusing in what the other lacked, that sense of dread and unease. However, it really struggles with communicating the inverse due to the similarity in the music throughout. If you skip between scenes, you'll realise the music really doesn't change much thematically, which after a while leads to a sense of monotony, making you less engaged in the film. If you want my advice, I would watch the film with the Matti Bye score. Right now, that's your best option despite its faults, but keep an eye out for re-releases or live music performances in the future. When it comes to a rating, I'm really conflicted about Phantom Carriage. On the one hand, all the technical qualities are top tier, the story's compelling, the direction is excellent, acting and music are both slightly flawed but good. There should be everything there to make it a masterpiece of silent cinema, and for many people it is. But not for me. Those detracting elements of both David and Edith really stopped me from becoming more invested in the film's narrative, which is a shame, but I've got to be honest. For me, it's a high 3 or a low 4. If the features I've just described aren't likely to bother you, then it's easily a 4 or a 5. I'd recommend this one mainly to silent film enthusiasts. The length and my issues regarding some of the characters might rub those unfamiliar with the genre the wrong way, but if it sounds good to you, then by all means, seek it out, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks very much everyone, and I will see you next time.